Thebes was the capital of Upper Egypt and the location of what became the biggest temple complex in the whole of ancient Egypt, encompassing the temples of Karnak and Luxor. The great temple of Luxor in Thebes was dedicated to Amun, the god of Thebes, and his wife Mut and son Khonsu. Its purpose was to house the important ceremony of the annual Opet festival, known as the Beautiful Feast of Opet, the biggest festival of the city of Thebes, when the cult images of these gods, Amun, Mut and Khonsu, were taken in procession from their Karnak temples to the temple complex of Luxor. The two sites are connected by a great avenue of sphinxes. We know from temple decorations how the procession of the Opet festival left the Karnak temple with the sacred boats carried by the priests and standard bearers and musicians accompanying them. And in other scenes, there are more musicians and acrobats to entertain the crowd. Another scene shows the return of the gods from Luxor back to Karnak along the Nile, sailing downstream after the festival had finished. So each year, at the time of the festival, great crowds, who were not at work because this was the time of the flood and the fields were flooded, gathered to see sacred images of the gods carried amid celebrations and festivities from their home in Karnak along a great processional avenue that led into the Luxor temple. They would remain in the temple for about 24 days before returning. The crowds, however, did not see what happened in the inner sanctum of the temple. The purpose of the rituals that went on there was to give energy back to the gods, rather as the flood time holiday gave the workers a chance to recoup at this same time of year, while simultaneously the flood was re-energizing the fields. The king's mother was somehow spiritually re-impregnated with the king's car, or spirit double, and the king himself was symbolically reborn from a birthing house in the temple. Though the surviving temple is not from the same time period as the construction of the Avebury henge, the suggestion here is that the festival itself went back to that time, which is entirely possible, as other Egyptian ceremonies with similar purpose, such as the Jubilee festivals, are known to have originated in pre-dynastic times. The chronology of Avebury is far from certain, but it's thought that the first phase of construction of the ditch and bank of the henge began around 2800 BC, which would be at the very end of the period known as the pre-dynastic in Egyptian history. Although it's called pre-dynastic, by 2800 BC there had already been many pharaohs, and Upper and Lower Egypt had been united many generations earlier by Pharaoh Nahma in around 3100 BC. Thebes was occupied at least as early as 3200 BC. Although the timing is not certain, it seems the Egyptian civilization was already quite developed by the time Avebury was built. For example, they had been using their written script for around 300 years by this point. The second phase of the henge construction at Avebury is thought to have begun around 2700 BC, which was the start of the Old Kingdom in Egypt and the beginning of pyramid building. The outer ring of stones at Avebury is thought to have been set up around 2600 BC, with Silbury following soon after, and coinciding pretty well with the construction of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Much of Old Kingdom Thebes was obliterated by the construction of the massive Middle and New Kingdom temple complex. The temple precinct of Karnak was known as Ipet Isu, which means select spot, or the most select of places, and Old Kingdom pharaonic statue remains give evidence that it had already been selected as a special site and been of interest to the pharaohs back at that earlier time. It's thought that there may have been a temple on that site in the period, for a list of king names at Karnak, which seems to honour those who had previously built at the site but whose works had been built over, known as the Karnak king list, includes pharaohs going back to Sneferu at the very start of the Old Kingdom. In the beliefs of the Egyptians themselves, the Karnak site had been divinely selected in the first time. The temple stood where the primordial mound of creation rose from the waters of chaos and where the first city was created. In the Karnak temple, Hatshepsut raised 4 enormous obelisks of pink granite, gilded all over with electrum, gold with a high silver content, in pairs on either side of the temple doors. One of them still stands and is the tallest standing obelisk in Egypt. It has an inscription running around it, which proclaims Karnak as the primordial mound. Hatshepsut says she doesn't want people of far-off days, in other words us, to look at these and not know who put them there or why. So she tells us. She put them there because, while sitting around in the palace, she suddenly felt inspired by Amun to honour the fact that, according to the secret plan in the god's mind, a mystery into which she has been initiated, the Karnak site, Ipet Sut, is the sacred hill of the first time. She wants the glorious light of these gilded obelisks to be outside the gates leading from the dark interior of the temple, like the sun emerging from the gates of the horizon, out of the darkness of the primordial mound into the light of day. And she says, I have done this with a loving heart for my father Amun. Initiated in his secret of the beginning, I did not forget whatever he had ordained. I entered into the plans of his heart. I did not turn back to the city of the Owl Lord. I know that Ipet Sut, the Karnak temple, is the horizon, also translated as Lightland, on earth, the august hill of the first occasion, the creation, the sacred eye of the All Lord, his favourite place that bears his beauty.